Okay, great and glorious, Nick Dutch here yet again. What I want to do now is expand just a little further. We've got a few more subjects to cover before we can come to a full conclusion as to what science really is. So again, using Wikipedia research, we're looking at the word empirical, E-M-P-I-R-I-C-A-L. So empirical research. It says here, empirical research is any research that bases its findings upon direct or indirect observation and as its test of reality. Okay, so in this definition, it doesn't suggest what particular methods of sorry, I just have a bit of light on me. What particular means of observation it's talking about. It's talking about direct or indirect observation. So that wouldn't rule out completely introspection, for instance, which is when you search through your own mind. Such research may also be conducted according to hypothetico-deductive procedures, such as those developed by the work of R.A. Fisher. You want me to have a look at that as well? Come on, let's focus on empirical for a moment. The researcher attempts to describe accurately the interaction between the instruments or the human senses and the entity being observed. Well, what if the entity is yourself? I mean, it would be a little false for me to sit here and say that to analyze, to do self-analysis would be empirical. I mean, one could not say that. But if one was to design an astral projection experiment in which the subject you were about to experiment upon had no foreknowledge of you doing this whatsoever, and you were then to design it very carefully, design your meditation, design the astral projection with great care, and then to do the projection to this person, interfere with their dreams somehow, and then the next day take all the notes which you would have collected when you were, designing the experiment, and all the things and all the notes about what went on in your mind during the astral projection experiments, which you wrote down after the astral projection, but before you go and see the person you experimented upon, and then go to that person and ask them to, without looking at your notes, write down everything they dreamt of that night. And then you can compare the notes. You could say that that type of experiment would be verging upon the empirical. It then goes on to say, if instrumentation is involved, the researcher is expected to calibrate his or her instruments by applying it to known standard objects and documenting the results before applying it to unknown objects. So it's saying if instrumentation is involved. So even in empirical research, you don't always have to use instrumentation, but there would be other ways of having some kind of values to be applied to your method of investigation, so long as there is some calibration or some way of structuring degrees of measurement. Okay, in practice, the accumulation of evidence for or against any particular theory involves planned research designs. That will be similar to experimental design that I've alluded to earlier on. For the collection of empirical data, and academic rigor plays a large part in judging the merits of research design. So every experiment will have to be open to challenge. Several typographies of research designs have been suggested, one of the most popular of which comes from Campbell and Stanley, 1963. They are responsible for popularizing the widely cited distinction among pre-experimental, experimental, and quasi-experimental designs, and are staunch advocates of the central role of randomized experiments in educational research. So even in something considered to be empirical research, there's still different schools of thought. And one can extrapolate to say that different schools of experimental design or of empirical research would be usable for different types of experiments. I'm still suggesting that anti-positivism or something which has some aspects of both positivism and anti-positivism thrown into it would be useful for investigating into the occult. But it becomes difficult when we're trying to tackle the subject of truth versus non-truth with something like the astral projection experiment that I mentioned earlier on. because what we're not trying to do is to say that the astral body actually exists. What we're trying to do is to say that an exercise was done and some results seem to occur, and then to be able to try and analyze it afterwards to try and work out what achieved what. Okay, we're going on to another subject. We'll try and go into the word empirical integrated detail. Back in a minute.